So good morning from home. You can see from my outfit. This is Eric right here from Hong Kong, Division of Languages and Communication, College of Professional and Continuing Education, the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. So far I'm the only one in the only presenter. So maybe I'll take my time a little bit. So my topic is about summary writing because summary writing still plays a critical role in academic writing at the tertiary level. So in particular, I'm investigating the interpersonal commitment strategies as a process of change in social sciences undergraduate summary writing task. So I'm going to lay out my talk as follows. So I'll first start by talking about why do we do summary writing, or why do we study summary writing? And then I'll focus a little bit on committing more or less interpersonal meaning. So, summary writing involves a very complex process of change, including ideational change and textual organizational change, aside from what we commonly know about deleting the information that we don't need and so on. And I'll also talk a little bit about my data and how I went about the analysis. And I'll share the very preliminary findings. So this is still work in progress. So I feel so good that you guys are here. So if you have any thoughts, any advice that can help me move on and proceed, I will be very happy. And I'll also talk a little bit about how the study may have pedagogical or other implications for writing instruction. And I'll also talk about the issues that I have encountered or any thoughts that I have regarding the notion of a commitment, because commitment is not something new and it requires some updates maybe. So we can talk about that. Okay. So as I said a few minutes ago, why do we do summary writing? Why do we engage in the research of summary writing? Is that it happens that over our academic career, we do a lot of summary. Okay, so the ability to write summaries of source text is critical, is very important in the context of writing multi-voiced or heteroglossic academic essays, lit reviews, and we can see we need summary writing everywhere. No matter is writing up a separate summary literature review, or maybe it's just a part of your thesis, your dissertation, or maybe even when you're writing a paragraph, the concluding sentence has a lot of like summary work to do. So that's why summary writing process is highly complex and causes overwhelming cognitive load on students, not just students, like whenever we are writing our essays, whenever we are writing our articles, we come up with a lot of, like we encounter a lot of challenges, regarding how we are closing that particular paragraph, maybe. So according to Casaza, work a bit of time ago, to write a good summary, you need to know your text, your source text, and then you have to select the most important information. And as I said, you have to delete what you don't need, the minor and redundant details, and you don't go specific. Okay, and then you combine similar idea into categories, and then you paraphrase the source text as the final product. So if we look at summary on the client of instantiation, so we can like comfortably fit the steps back in the client of instantiation. So we start from reading first by understanding the text. And then as we go up, because we know that we have to generalize idea, we have to select information before we instantiate the text into your target text. So maybe through the process of summarizing, through the process of paraphrasing, and it doesn't have to be within the same system, or maybe it doesn't have to be within the same genre, as we see in the summary task that my student is engaged in. So it's basically a shift of genre. So there's a lot of, summarizing or reinstantiation work to do. Okay, so because of the time and because of the the time that I have for the analysis, I promised that I would do some like attitude analysis, but I kind of changed my focus a little bit because summary writing is intertextual by nature. So I would like to focus on that first. As you will see in a minute, when I ask my students to write their summary text, they have to, you know, be aware of their putative readers, so who the readers are and what text that they are engaged in. So it may implicitly involve writers' disalignment with the propositions in the source text. So it isn't just descriptive when they summarize. It also involves how much they know about the text, how much they are sure about the arguments in the text to be true or otherwise. Okay, so they may as well adjust how attitude or how their interpersonal meaning is arranged to convey a particular attitudinal hue. So I did not encourage my students to display their stance or display their attitudinal positioning so much, but it is inevitable as long as they identify anything attitudinal in the source text, they will put it back to their summary text. So here's a little bit of context about my study. So I have a class of 48, 50 students engaged in a summary writing task for especially for undergraduate social sciences students. So this is a part of their academic writing course, and this is their in-class assessment one to require them to apply summarizing and paraphrasing skills. Okay. And I asked them to summarize an edited discussion section of a psychology journal article. So, a journal article can be very, very long, but it's not possible to have them summarize a very long text based on time and based on, of course, their proficiency. So we can still see them struggle during the in-class assignment. It's already open book, and my students are all L2 English students, so they have to rely on a lot of tools, let alone Google Translate. I'm so sorry, and DeepL, like translation tools. I let them use the tools. I let them use all the materials that they have had, throughout the course. So the final product is a summarized and paraphrased content in a summary essay. So that's like a signature, a major, a significant cut of word count from around 800 words to no more than 400 words. Okay. Aside from summarizing the content, I also required them to quote the source article at least once, but no more than 10% of the overall word count of the task. So here's a look of the task on the left-hand side. So I took out a part of the article from the article, and then on the right you have a sample exemplar writing because he's done so well, so I put him here. So you can see on the left-hand side, it's just a part of the task, and then they have to reduce. I always use the term, the cooking term, you reduce the content into something that so that you can keep the essence of the article, like the source of the dish. So we already have a question in the chat room regarding the rationale for quoting Erica. So this is a requirement that has passed on for generations, but I think the rationale as I design this task for the students is that they have to be aware of the fact that whenever they come across the text, the source text, for example, when they do literature review, they have to cite the source anyway. Okay, but as you will see, the source text is very clean, quote unquote, because I have taken away all the in-text citations from the source text so that the students can focus on this text instead of going to cite other texts in the original article. Okay, so I did a quick look at the genres of the source text and the summary text. So the a genre of the article is, of course, procedural recounts. So when they are describing or when they are reporting on the findings from the article, they are basically writing a description. So that's a trip that they have to go all the way up as they finished reading the article or the part of the article. They have to choose the meaning that they have that they wish to keep to summarize them into an essay. Yeah, I can't find any other better analogy for writing a summary. It's pretty much like keeping the essence for the source of your great dish. The data that I have chosen for the task is from a psychology journal, and it's about toxic masculinity and school bullying. So from these authors. And the data that I have collected were from 10 high-graded student summary essays with the grades ranged from B plus to A grades. Okay, I read a bit from Ken's abstract proceedings from ISLC, his discussion on commitment, and finally, I didn't choose his approach because summary writing is mainly a process of subtraction. Maybe I deleted that slide because essentially you are deleting things that you don't need. So it's predominantly paradigmatic. Of course, in the process of reducing content, or when you are normalizing content from clauses to phrases, it involves a lot of paradigmatic choice or a syntagmatic choice. But for now, we can focus in base mainly on a paradigmatic shift or paradigmatic selection of meaning to be included in the summary text. So correct me if I'm wrong. So if you think that, summary writing can be highly, structural kind of consideration, you can let me know. Okay, so I used a UAM corpus tool to annotate the engagement resources from the source and summary text. And then I identify some comparable parts of the source and summary text. I'll show you some examples when I show you the findings in a minute. And then I will determine the common commitment or decommitment strategies in the summary text. So here are some of the findings that I have. Okay, the overall engagement pattern from the original text, it's of course still heteroglossic. When the writer presents some of the findings, they will have to use a lot of endorsed resources to prove the findings to be rigorous and so on. But you can also see the students' texts are increasingly more heteroglossic. As I will show you later on, it's highly heteroglossic because mainly because they have to cite the original text. So they basically expanded the dialogic space just to include the source text in their summary. And the students writing use more expand resources than the original text. And compared with the original text, again, they are using more proclaim resources than disclaim resources. So I'll show you a little bit about the proclaim resources. Why would they, expose themselves in the text? Okay, and then the students use more counter strategies, like using more however, and they use fewer deny than the original text. That's especially when the original text talks about the statistical findings, and they have examples such as there are no particular significant differences or significant results, and so on and so forth. And you can see the types of proclaim. In the original text, there's predominantly endorsement, while there is there are two examples of pronouns from the student's text. So here is one of the examples. So the original text says, alternatively, perhaps students do not explicitly identify with traditional concepts of masculinity or are aware of the stigma associated with endorsing beliefs, suggesting that men are inherently superior to women and other genders. Maybe you already find that the students have tried their best to paraphrase, but not very effectively. But I didn't, pinpoint that. I was not very picky because they already struggled quite a bit, like reading a very advanced text. So a student went. The author claimed that the dominant awareness emerged from men unconsciously, albeit the fact that they did not explicitly identify with traditional concepts of masculinity. So here's a slight change of stance or positioning right here, in that the student thought that what the author tried to say was definite. So he thought that it was a fact. So he kind of portrayed the argument to be so. But of course, you can always argue whether the students have made the right observation, and you can, help them adjust the kind of positioning that they have. So here comes the expansion types. So it's 100% entertain resources in comparison with attributes, because I removed the citations. There were a few. There were at least 4 to 5 citations from the original text, but I did not want to distract my students from, engaging with the source text, so I removed the citations. And they were also required to cite the source text because I wanted them to observe the APA conventions. Like, obviously, they are psychology, they are social sciences students, they will come across this kind of citation and referencing practices quite a bit. So I have them practice this kind of citation and referencing convention earlier on in the semester. So I heard a very interesting analogy again about citation and referencing in another academic writing course. So the teacher regarded this kind of APA citation and referencing as a kind of husband and wife relationship. Not sure whether you agree, but quite maybe likely if students forgot to cite, maybe students forget to include a reference, this is quite like a husband without a wife or a wife without a husband, or someone without a partner, to be a little bit more politically correct. So in terms of attribute, it's realized in the student's text quite corroborating what Susan Hood has said regarding how students reinstantiate the source text into the summary text in the form of meta-discursive labels such as Ingram's and colleagues' paper highlight the aspects of WIT, precis research, Ingram's article, the writer's arguments. So aside from using the reporting verbs or reporting processes such as the ones that I have underlined, they're also aware that they have to generalize the paper in some way. So maybe that also like answers your question. So if when I explicitly ask them to cite the source, they would think about ways to describe the source. Okay, so I have a couple of minutes left. So if you don't mind, I will eat it up. So here's a summary of the findings. So the summary text show students' higher commitment in adjusting the dialogic space to express alignment with the source text. So it does not have to be like dryly descriptive or, directly reporting on what they have in the source text. So as I read the literature about commitment as well as Ken's discussion of what it means to be more committed and what it means to be less committed, it seems that he didn't mention whether proclaiming or disclaiming or expanding or comparing comparing contraction and expansion, which is more committed. So I may argue that there is a higher commitment expressed in the summary text through proclaiming in the summary text, like putting in more authorial judgment in the text to adjust the certainty or their certainty about what they see in the original text. So they use more proclaiming resources than the original text. Okay, so Lucy asked a very important question that maybe I will proceed to doing. So some implications for writing instruction is that, as with what Sue said in her 2008 article, so I hope to teach students how to balance their voice and other voices from other authors. So that's what I also told my students at the very beginning of the writing course, that when they write, they have to think about the readers, not just me as the assessor of the course. So they are writing for their social sciences peers. So who the putative readers are, they have to be very, conscious about. And they also have to select the right linguistic resources to instantiate the source text voices. So the future directions, as I went to Shushi's plenary yesterday, so it's also good that maybe I'll do a more dedicate genre analysis of the source text and the summary text, because I found that the discussion section of the text looks like an essay. So what kind of essay is it? And during the course of summarizing the discussion essay into a summary essay, what processes of changes are involved? And of course, I would also like to look at the ideation, attitude, couplings in the summarized content, as promised. And some more other issues to consider, as I mentioned earlier on. So can increasing authorial investment like dialogic contraction be an increase in commitment, as Jim Martin 2008 suggests that explicit interpersonal metaphor is some kind of a hyper commitment. And another question that I have in my mind is that whether summary writing is only a subtraction, because when we consider grammatical metaphor, ideational metaphor in specific, we can also consider that from not just a paradigmatic perspective, but also in terms of structural changes, what kind of considerations there are. So I didn't include a reference list because usually no one reads it. But if you are interested in knowing what my references are from or where they are from, feel free to email me. So that's all from me. So I, welcome all the questions, all the comments, all the, advice that you may have in your mind from you. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Eric. I would like to ask my question first because I'm interested in
Okay, sure.
Yes. I am concerned in the way your student summarizing the test, and as our students in Vietnam, they normally rely on paraphrasing tools to Keyport or something else to work with summarizing in our academic writing. So how can we control the factors that may influence the results of their summarized test?
Yeah. Oh, so that's the question, or is it a comment?
Just a question for us to ensure the final products in the state of comparing with the short stats.
Okay. I was just wondering how much we should allow students to use paraphrasing tools, because the main rationale for the academic writing course as a skill-based course is to have them master the skills of summarizing and paraphrasing. But I'm not sure whether I've made a mistake by letting them use any tools that they can find, during the assessment. I could have asked them to do handwriting, but it is not very advanced because students usually do typing, in the assignment anyway. So I'm not sure whether it's a good idea to have them go back to handwriting. Okay, so we've got a few questions in the chat room. So Lucy asks if I explored the degree of alignment in the choice of process. I think that would be my next step, because I did a very the first layer of engagement analysis to look at the differences between the summary text and the source text. So yeah, and the second thought, it seems that underlying teaching point is that this writing summary is not neutral. If they're aiming for neutrality, then that's a choice. True. I mean, if we are looking at writing summaries for literature review, eventually they will have to take a stance, right? So they have to consider whether they are to express their position to like based on the observation that the author is claiming, or whether they are arguing, whether they believe something to be true. So yeah, I think I have to agree with you right here that summary writing is actually not neutral. But I also ask them to refrain from, explicitly sharing their interpretation or sharing their attitude, because I think that's because of the purpose of the task is to have them simply summarize the text, to choose what they didn't need. So I didn't think beyond that point at that moment.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's like you actually are asking them to be neutral. Is that right?
Yes, that's what I did.
So that's quite cool in terms of, possible sequence, kind of dealing with the ideational meaning and being neutral about it. And then what would change if you actually, as you said, want to be sprinkling a stance throughout a literature review.
Yeah.
Then you can bring in that as well. I've actually got, if you're interested, I've got something that we do in a one-off 2-hour workshop, totally different, where we just try to talk about bringing in literature as a choice of alignment. If you're interested, I can flick you that.
Sure, that would be fantastic. Yeah, and I think that also has to do with students' motivation in doing this kind of task, because this is some of the conundrums that I'm like encountering right now in terms of like improving students' writing, and they struggle not just because they can't master the advanced kind of quote unquote advanced level of writing. They are simply struggling in the language because, as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, they're all L2 students, and the differences is so great. I've got some ethnic minority students whose English is so good, and they didn't struggle, and they I mean, my Hong Kong, my Cantonese speaking, my Mandarin speaking students always assumed that these students, the ethnic minority English speaking students, are very good at the language, and so my students simply gave up. So when I taught them like summarizing skills or paraphrasing skills to master the ideational processes like summarizing or nominalizing ideas from clauses to to noun phrases is already a great feat to them. So in your case, so how would you motivate your students to take part in this kind of writing workshops and literacy support?
Wow, the big question. You mean how do you get attendance to self-enrolled workshops? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's right.
Well, I've sort of operating in two contexts. One is where it's embedded, so the help is already in the core curriculum. But for the research students, they self-enroll. I can't tell you a magical recipe
Of course.
but I think what's interesting is, well, put it this way. At Sydney University, when I was there for a while at the Learning Centre, and then in my context now, for research students, any workshop with the wording literature review has high attendance.
Okay.
It seems to be something of great need. And so, yeah, we're trying to get the label right for the workshop name and the blurb to match to lure students in. But there is, I haven't done anything in the way that you're doing, which is super interesting, around how do you actually help them to select within that really short time frame. But within our little one-off context, the idea that, as you bring something in, you've got some expression of value going on. They really enjoy thinking about that.
Okay. So as I said in the chat room, marketing strategies matter. How I, word the diction for naming the workshops or the support would be very important. Okay,
yeah, and I've asked
that.
students directly. Actually, I did it the other week. We've got a workshop that really should have a lot of people in it, and I'm saying, okay, guys, you've attended this. Like, what should we call it? And I got their feedback. So that's one thing to try.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you so much, Lucy. That would be great. Yeah, that you can let me know a little bit more about your work on having students to do the alignment choices, to make the alignment choices. So I'll be in touch with you if that's okay. Okay. So thank you, Erica. Thank you, Jennifer, for your questions, for your comments, and for your support hearing up throughout my presentation. So
do you have any
I
other
will
question
pass it. Yeah.
for the question with Eric?
Yes, I do.
Yes, please. Okay.
So just circling back to what you and Lucy have been discussing, I think part of it is at the meso level of what are we doing, but the higher level of why. And I think that then breaks down into the micro in terms of the process choices or the alignment and the disalignment and which processes are used to represent that. Because I think the purpose of the lit review is to build one's argument, to position oneself in the range of that literature, to recognize that there's variation in it, and then to position accordingly. So I think that the why should we be taking this course is because it serves this larger role, or why should we be taking this workshop? Is it the literature review, this practice of paraphrasing and summarizing enables you to situate yourself in this breadth of literature. And I would point you towards an article that I have found helpful with my students, is by Liardet and Black. And it touches on the different reporting verbs or projecting processes that students use. And I've used this with my students, looking at the abstract in terms of the staging of the research article and deconstructing those stages within an abstract. And essentially one of their major theses is that students overuse the projecting process state as this neutrality. They state. But what is your position in relation to that? And I think that's really quite important. But I had a more specific question going back to slide 19, where you were discussing students.
Okay. Oops. Jennifer? So am I still in the room?
Yes, I can see just
Yes.
Oh.
But she
Okay.
has frozen.
It's froze.
Projecting clause was problematic in terms of its.
Oops.
Sorry, I got bumped out of the hyper world. Now, sorry.
Yes, so what was your question? Yeah.
So I was just
Please.
sort of curious, how was this one graded? Is this an exemplar of good work, or were you critiquing it?
So there is an exemplar and there is a rubric. Yeah. So if you want me to show you my
I'm just curious, I'm curious about this one. I too have a rubric, and so I look at language representation and then also alignment and loyalty to the source. So this one, I think that the stance is significantly different, and yet there's a huge swath of patch writing, specifically identify with traditional concepts of masculinity. That's that's verbatim in both. So I'm just curious about your analysis of this. Like, is this acceptable?
Well, it's borderline acceptable, and it would be better if the students could, put this phrase in quote and then with the citation.
Okay.
But based on the overall quality of the text, I couldn't say too much about that being like a copied phrase. But I did mention this to my students that you can't simply, copy phrases into your resultant summary without citation.
Yeah, interesting. So I think that's worth delving into the values of why are we doing this. So I would not accept that as acceptable because it's recognizable.
Yeah.
and not only is the language not changed enough, the stance has changed too much. And in fact, it should be the opposite series of changes, that the stance is loyal to the original or representative of, and any disalignment is made explicitly, but the language choices within are not recognizable.
Yes,
Yes.
so I think what you said about like loyalty to the source is quite interestingly put. Yeah, so I might have, you know, I might consider changing the rubric a little bit to, you know, focus more on how students may want to align themselves with the original text, as well as how, you know, faithful they are in with regards to the original source.
Interesting. Again, I think
Thanks,
all of
Jennifer.
these little micro critiques are worth discussing in the context of why are we doing this? Because one thing that I found very interesting working with students is recognizing that experts can disagree with one another. And that's a disorienting realization, because if we're expecting this alignment of consensus, and to actually realize that we're entering into a conversation with people who might be on the same topic and have some similarities, but also have some differences of opinion, I think is an academic maturation that this discussion can enable.
Okay. Thank you so much for your comments. I'll take that into consideration when I teach this course again and do this assessment with the students again.
So do we have any other questions for Eric for a very interesting topic?
Look, just to add, I think it's really hard to teach summary writing. So good on you for having a go. I mean, seriously, it's hard to think of a harder thing to teach in terms of what happens with meaning from an original text to a summary. So I think any of our efforts are commendable, I think. So thank you very much.
Yay. I think we always start from these like comparatively easier stuff first. So we talked about abstract nouns. We talked about even abstract nouns can be very abstract to students, but at least they know what they can do with abstract nouns. And then we move forward to paraphrasing, and they tried. And then I also talked a little bit about nominalization. Why do we need nominalization in summary writing? And then we have practices to at least have them choose what they don't need to be put in the summary text and what to keep. And then they focus on what to keep in the summary text, and then they do the paraphrasing. So very painstaking process. It takes roughly 6-7 weeks to get there.
Yeah, wow.
But that's not enough, I know, but that's what we can do as a course.
It's interesting to distinguish between summary writing for, say, having to do an annotated bibliography versus, I think, you know, what Jennifer's emphasizing, the whole purpose of the literature is the foundation, you know, for new research. So I think those two different purposes strongly influence, what we try to teach within the time we've got.
So we haven't seen our second presenter here, but we have the third presenter here, and I think we may have several minutes for more discussion if any one of you would like to discuss more with Eric, or otherwise we will turn to the third presenter. Eric, what do you think?
I think I'm good for now.
Yes,
Margot?
Yeah.
Oh, Margot has a question.
Yes.
Yeah, if I may, I was just thinking a bit further on the question that you included on your last slide about higher authorial investment and dialogic contraction being possible indicators of increased commitment. Of course, they're not isolated elements, right? I think the combined influence of these may also extend to some of the rhetorical strategies that are used by students. So you would have to carefully examine how these elements interact and how they contribute to the students' own evaluative stance and their persuasive intent. So do you think that the students incorporating this type of what Martin refers to as explicit interpersonal metaphor in their writing, do you think it could inadvertently hinder their critical thinking skills or analytical skills, since it kind of limits their exposure to other viewpoints or perspectives?
I
hope that
think
makes
that's
sense.
one. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I said to my students about why we not use I think in essays, not just because it's subjective in terms of the use of I always ask them, I always told them it's not about the use of I. So very commonly we use I's or we's in our academic articles, but it's that when they think, they aren't actually thinking when they write. When they put I think in the text, I always ask them. I always write that on the whiteboard, saying I think that, and then I cover I think that, and ask them, well, does it still mean the same? And they will go, ah, yes. Even without I think that, is still their voice. So that's what I that's what I pointed out in the writing course, that you don't have to be so overt about yourself. You don't have to be so authorially present in order to show what you think in front of your readers. So true, maybe the use of I think, the explicit exposure of the authorial presence may hinder the students' positioning in regards with regards to the other positions. So I would ask them to think carefully about the projection choices. So what kind of process they can use aside from claim. So I can see from my data, there are a couple of uses of claim, but they may not think that claim actually means a little bit more distanced positioning in comparison with other processes such as suggest. I could tell they simply like sprinkle different kinds of verbs into the text simply to show variety, because what my students have to go through usually in their undergraduate career is that they would also go to the IELTS test later on in their in the test. I always told them what you have learned in the IELTS is not very useful, especially when you write your essays. I always told them not to use firstly, secondly, thirdly, fourthly, fifthly. That doesn't really help.
Or in conclusion.
But or in all, that kind of thing.
Okay, I really like the fact that you're actively encouraging your students to use objective explicit constructions, to use a Hallidayan term. And of course, there's this there's the influence of social media, where they're constantly using more subjective constructions to express their own viewpoints. So yeah, okay, thanks.
From time to time I'll infiltrate some SFL ideas into the course, whether they like it or not.
Good.
Okay, Hyun asked how students L1 influences the process of summarizing the text. Like immensely. You know, the process of how they work out the text. They will read the text first, and then they will put the source text into Google Translate, and to get the Chinese meaning, the rough Chinese meaning of the text, and then they will come up with an idea in Chinese, and then they put the ideas back in Google Translate, and they get the results, and they try their best to make the final text like English, which to me is not. But the 10 essays that you have seen were the students who did not use Google Translate significantly. So L1 plays a big part because they simply have no idea what they're reading very often. They have no, they may understand English in a daily context. They may understand English in the daily academic conversational context, but in terms of academic reading, they're very weak. So what goes wrong usually starts from the very beginning of the instantiation. They can't get the source text right. They have to rely a lot on the machine support, things like that. Yeah, so that's my concern as well. Yeah, good paraphrasing is hard. It requires true understanding first. Understanding the text, understanding what it means. Thank you so much for all the resources that you have sent me this way. The short videos and the articles from Cassie, from Jennifer. Okay. I'll take them all into consideration as well as my reading list. Thank you so much, everybody.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you very much, Eric, for a very interesting presentation on the topic. And I think it's now for us to move to the next presenter who's here with us, our third presenter in the list, Wan, who from the Universitas Pendidikan Indonesia. Are you here with us?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, wonderful.
Thank you, Dai, and thank you for moderating us. Actually, we are here with my colleague Yanti Wirza. So we are going to report what we did in MI context in Indonesia. But we would like to start. Maybe I'll ask my colleague Yanti Wirza to start with the presentation, and I'll continue in the next slides later.
So to share the screen?
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay, sure.
Right, so I would like to thank everyone for coming to this session. Our work here, reporting on the preparing preservative science teachers of an AMI program in optimizing meaning-making resources, the SFL perspective. We're from University Pendidikan Indonesia. I'll deliver the first part of the presentation, and up until the methodology, and my colleague Wawan will continue with the analysis. Next slide, please. Okay, so our work is looking at the phenomenon of English medium instruction, particularly in Asian in Asia context, in Indonesian context. There's been many higher institutions creating this kind of program as part of their internationalization, and in the EMI context, and also as English as a foreign language in Indonesia, we see here the connection between the EMI, ESP, English specific purposes, and CLIL. And also in the science teaching, the use of various semiotic resources has been more dominantly, and the disciplinary semiotic transposition here, we also look at this as part of our focus. And in addition to that, the phenomena of translanguaging, which include the linguistic and multimodal repertoires. And next slide. So multimodal transposition here, it means the expressing meanings. So we have different modalities, but as a particular, but they in essence deliver the same meaning. And the meta-language is crucial for teachers to transpose meaning among these multimodal or modes involved. And the multimodal transmission practice unfolded in a way that they facilitated the transposition of tacit to explicit knowledge by maximizing the multimodal affordances. And also it means here to deliver what is to teach and what to focus on to boost the students' interaction. And looking at multimodality in teaching science, particularly in EMI context, the linguistic and multimodal repertoires are used to facilitate learning of content, of the content of the subject. And it is here to visually communicate the knowledge of science by expressing a wider variety of semiotic resources. And the use of multimodal semiotic resources in EMI instruction is complementary components to the translanguaging practices that is to support multi-voicedness or heteroglossic classroom. And particularly on translanguaging, as Atagai and Garcia mentioned, it is the act of deploying all of the speaker's lexical and structural resources, and it is a flexible recursive practice of multilingual users, as you can find in many contexts, particularly in Indonesia as multilingual society, where they employ more than one named languages to make meaning and achieve communicative intent. And so it is a strategic employment of multiple semiotic resources in meaning making that shape their experience, the knowledge understanding, and the social interaction, both in terms of content and as well as the interaction in the classroom. So from the SFL perspective, we have here this diagram of mode, field, and tenor. And in terms of genre and how to structure activity, taxonomy and property, we use language to discuss the topic in the science context. And in terms of tenor, it is used to use the language to establish interpersonal relations. And mode is using the language to structure the information and through the modes of communication, be spoken or written or other channels. So meanings in SFL perspective, in our context, we look at the context of culture. The context here is the science learning, several courses and interaction that we found in the data. And the context of situation here includes the tenor, the relationship between the classroom members, the teachers, students, and among the students, the field, what is the topic being discussed. We have here two topics presented in this presentation. First is the disease and immunity, and the other one is earth science. And the mode here using spoken and written modes. So in our purpose of study is to identify the pre-service science teachers' meaning-making practices in translanguaging and intermodal relations. Our methodology, it is a part of a bigger project that we have been doing in the past 2 years. As a case study in an AMI context, is a international science program at our university. It is the member of the class that we take is the class of lower secondary science. So these are the pre-service teachers who are going to teach at international secondary schools in the region, and they are being taught the curriculum, both in the local and sometimes also in the sort of more international oriented curriculum, usually found in international schools. And we have the data from the observation, recorded session of experiment, interview, and documents from the student work. And the topics that we present here is the disease and immunity of pathogen and earth science. And the data analysis, we did the SFL analysis, semiotic affordances, tenor, field, and mode relations. So the second half of the presentation will be delivered by my colleague. I'm giving it to you, Pawan. Go ahead.
Thank you, Bu Yanti. We look at data in a written form from the core table. So in this case, the pre-service science teachers prepare their lessons in a written form. And then later we look at the translanguaging practices by identifying meaning-making process from a spoken language. So we'd like to look at how the intermodal relations made sense by the pre-service science teacher by looking at the vigor in representing viruses. So in this case, the student teacher prepare the language or verbal mode from the visual design by stating that viruses are microscopic parasites, generally much smaller than bacteria. Human virus diseases include the common cold, poliomyelitis, measles, mumps, chickenpox, herpes, rubella, influenza, AIDS, and coronavirus. And then in the next text or paragraph, they stated that coronavirus disease or COVID-19 is an infectious disease that are spread by droplets generated through coughing and sneezing, and antibiotics do not work for viral infections. So when we look at these images, we would like to see the taxonomy or classification that the pre-service students tried to explicate from the image. If we look at the visualizing effort, so we try to visualize what they thought and what they express in their verbal interaction by looking at this one. Like coronaviruses is a kind of classification because they mention some virus diseases. Meanwhile, the next one is a kind of process. So the process of coughing and sneezing generated droplets that could spread viruses by to anyone who, if you look at the image again, the two persons were not aware of the viruses around them. So we'll try to make sense of this by identifying paraclauses that the image shows an impacted person. So the impacted person is spreading virus. The two persons are wearing masks to avoid being impacted by the unseen virus, and the two persons are not aware of virus around them. The represented actors in the image include the impacting and impacted actors. So the person in the middle is the impacting represented actor. The two persons on each side are the impacted represented actors. And then the person shows the impacting actors' activities like sneezing, coughing, and then person spreads the virus. And the two persons wear masks, do their own work, and do not see the virus. So in this transposition, the possible description following the potential meaning of the image could be perhaps like coronavirus disease is an infectious disease that are spread by droplets generated through coughing and sneezing. Looking at the additional explication, viruses are microscopic parasites, generally much smaller than bacteria. Human virus diseases include the common cold, poliomyelitis, measles, mumps, herpes, rubella, influenza, AIDS, and coronavirus. So it's considered an additional information because it's not reflected in the image. I think it has been connected to other reconstructive genre from the text that the students try to explicate in the verbal words, that they tend to add definition in every time the student teachers describe the image to students. Another example of translanguaging. So in a spoken practice, the pre-service teachers use English language, Indonesian language, Sundanese language, and Arabic language. As you can see from the highlighted colors, the yellow one is using English language, and the gray one is Indonesian language. The blue one is not here, the Sundanese language, but in another text. And then the next one, Arabic language, by saying Alhamdulillah, praise be to God. So in Indonesian language, we can have a look at these jangan-jangan itu parasite. So perhaps it's parasite. Amit-amit, it means an interjection just to avoid or just to not hopefully not to me, hopefully not impacted me, for example, by maybe God forbid. And then there's also some statement that leads to laughs. And then tanda cinta, which means the symbol of love. And then the blue blood, which means the darah biru means the blue blood. So like a royal blood, can say some metaphors that can be used for high class society. Ya, sama-sama ini kan. So yes, it is the same. These are the nucleoride, and then terus ada bintik-bintiknya, and these are the spots. These are the spots, right? And then we try to identify these translanguaging practices by looking at what meaning that student teachers try and try to use in their translanguaging practices. And this is the language if you want to hear. The words amit is spoken by the students. If you look at the next one, I think the video is quite long to listen to watch, but we would like to summarize with some expressions with the translanguaging. So the lecturers, what is it? What do you see? Yes, what is it? Jangan-jangan itu parasite. Perhaps it's parasites. Amit. So it's the intonation of amit, but unfortunately we didn't look at the intonation, how the intonation works for building interpersonal relations with the lecturer, but we look at the transcript to identify the types of meaning. So if you look at the words jangan-jangan itu parasit, or perhaps it's parasite, I think there's a structures of modality here, just to tease, to make fun, perhaps. Meanwhile, well, it's between being serious and serious, but I think this interpersonal relation leads to the feel that he's trying to explain in the next conversation. So this is also tenor interjection to express it is not expected. So we use this kind of language. This is not related to the field, but it's leading to the topic that they are talking about. There is something unusual, maybe malaria parasites, and they laugh. So the lecturer teaches the student teachers. Foto lagi. So take another photo, confirming and checking in response to the teaching seriously to make sure. So there is an activity, there's a serious activity. Although the lecturer tried to entertain the student teachers, but the student teachers try to take it seriously, just to take another photo again to make sure that this is a parasite. But then when they look at the blood, the sample of blood, so one student mentioned the symbol of love. It's a metaphorical for healthy blood cell, and also the blue blood is metaphorical for healthy blood cell too, but it's usually attributed to royal family blood in our culture. It is cultural. It is cultural, and also it is metaphorical. It's talking about the feel in metaphorical way instead of the congruent. But instead of using simile, but he's using blood is a symbol of love. Blood is a blue blood. So we look at the next one, and this is leukocytes, sir. Leukocyte, where I'm healthy, sir. So it's make sure how the field connects by using translanguaging practice between the concept of leukocytes and the concept of healthy blood, and also the concept of parasites. Again, here I said tenor relation by showing gratitude that they have healthy blood from the identified from the sample of blood. So another look is at the use of Indonesian language to talk about moon. This is the topic related to Earth science. So if you observe how the moon is rotating the sun, okay, talking about the moon is a beautiful, right? Wajahnya menghadap kita dan selalu tersenyum. So the lectures tends to use metaphor to enhance the meaning of the field, which is moon. So its face faces us and always smiles. So this is a metaphors for moon, and I think it's a common knowledge for us in Indonesian language that moon is beautiful because moon always smiles at us. Then students laughed, and then a little make noises. Another translanguaging practice, belajar dari bulan karena bulan itu tidak pernah membelakangi kita. So we learn from the moon because the moon never turns its back on us. I think that's also a concept of the moon related to the metaphors, related to our cultures, related to common knowledge that we have, just to emphasize the meaning of the field using metaphors. Okay, the next one, for example, here in the concepts of equinox. When will we get to know equinox point? It's supposed to be 21st March every year. We see the sun on 12 o'clock. That's the position of vernal equinox. What is vernal equinox? Vernal equinox itu artinya titik-titik musim. Jadi, titik balik musim itu adalah perubahan dari musim hujan. Kalau kita lihat musim hujan ke musim kemarau. So using internal conjunctive in emphasizing the feel is not using English, but using Indonesian language by looking jadi so if to talk about vernal equinox. So this translanguage approach creates a supportive environment for students to relate their understanding in the language they speak. We have identified that for intermodal relations, the student teachers tend to reconstruct in a common genre that they usually teach, but starting with the definition or sometimes with additional information, while translanguaging practices is using language to emphasize the field by using more metaphors and to build interpersonal relations by teaching students and relate to the field and use common interjections, and also to create a supportive or fun environment in teaching science, because science is considered maybe it's because science is considered a tough subject, hard subject. So kind of joke or making fun in a classroom is common, but the lectures try to lead or try to lead the students to understand the field by having a simultaneous connection between field and tenor. That's what we can identify from intermodal relations and translanguaging practices in my classroom in Indonesia. So there is a student's language proficiency in MI context. This is spoken by students in the interview. That's sometimes I don't understand what the lecturer explains, so I struggle myself to understand. But if the lecturer has translated the explanation into Indonesian, I understand. It really helps. And then because I often didn't understand the terms in English, and I explain with translanguage method to make sure the person I talk to understand what I just say. I use lots of examples and jokes in Indonesian, sometimes Sundanese. It helps students also to stay online in class, stay focused and not get bored. This is what the lecturer mentioned in the interview, and also in as shown in the data that he used more examples and jokes to teach his students. Stay focused and not get bored. That's the intention why the lecturer tried to use this kind of language. As long as it doesn't immediately switch to Indonesian only, so students are not used to it. So English as the language instruction, Indonesian, Sundanese, Arabic to indicate identity and cultural values and solidarity. I think more supposed to be elaborated later, but this discussion will be limited to talk about two kinds of translanguaging by using intermodal and translingual relations. So the curricular units take an important role in enabling the students to view and represent what is being described to advance their understanding by explicating visual representation. Transposition is one of the strategies to help students understand the content of the curricular unit presented by images. So therefore, it should be carried out by exploiting the visual features to explicate what it should be. And the fact that the student teachers have no sufficient or perhaps expansive or intensive or deep competence in using multimodal literacy components. And then understanding language of visual design helps teachers provide pedagogical framework to guide their development and demonstration. Also, the translanguage showcases the pedagogical or additional and also interpersonal functions to provide more comprehension of the field, interesting instruction and scaffolding to reinforce meaning and to express cultural identity and solidarity. So the conclusion, our study has demonstrated translanguaging and multimodal practices in explicating the contents of science texts, and multimodal practices exploited color, positions, elements, and images, and disciplinary science to explicate the content of scientific concepts, which may enhance engagement in learning. Meanwhile, multimodal literacy practices exploring more visual meta-language have yet to be exploited. The translanguaging practice evidently facilitated better delivery and meaning-making of the lesson, accelerated the flow and progress of the course activities, created more opportunities for interaction and discussion, and promoted a safe space for social and cultural expressions. So what we did is just identifying the meanings as reflected in the translanguaging and intermodal literacy practice, intermodal practices. So first, I have to summarize that we only look at the students' planning in a written form, and then student teachers interaction in the classroom using translanguaging practices. Okay, thank you very much. Feedback, suggestion, and question are welcome.
Thank you very much, Wan and Yanti, for your presentation on the role of translanguaging in science class. And our participants, do you have any question or feedback for our presenters? Please raise your hand or you can talk. Yes, Eric, please.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Oh, I was just applauding. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, Jennifer has a comment on the box
okay.
saying on the more reference to structural, not just lexical resources. Yes, as you see in our data, the translanguaging and the multimodal resources used beyond the lexical boundaries and into more complex structural and cultural expressions. Thank you so much for the feedback.
So do we have any other questions for our presenters?
All right, thank you so much then.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, there are no questions, so I would like to thank everyone for viewing and for paying attention to us.
We got one message. Yes, thank you for your work. Yes. Okay, thank you, Wan and Yanti, for your presentations. And if our participants have any further discussion, they can contact you too later. Yes.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So absolutely.
I think we can move to our next presentation. Listen here is with Vanyan Neira. Are you here with us, Vanyan?
Hello.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm here.
So we have the presentation on reading history in the EFL context of Argentina, analysis of cultural and temporal relation in historical accounts by Vania Neira and Natalia Arias, and from the faculty, yes, Córdoba, Argentina. So you have 20 minutes for presentation, and then we have 10 minutes for discussion. Yeah.
Okay, let me share the screen. Can you see the presentation there?
Yes, I can see your
Yes,
screen. Yes, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So thank you. I am Natalia Rios, and together with Vanina, we are going to present the paper, as you mentioned, titled Reading History in an EFL Context in Argentina. And we are going to show you the analysis of some of causal and temporal relations in historical accounts. So this is the overview of the presentation. We'll start with a brief introduction, and we'll mention the problem that motivated this study. Then we'll refer to the objectives of this research. We refer briefly to the theoretical framework. We'll give some insights into the methodology. We'll continue with the findings and discussion. And finally, we'll mention the contributions and implications of this study. So,
sorry to interrupt.
Yes, we're
Maybe
seeing
you could
the note
present.
in the slide, so you can turn on the presentation mode.
On the right, on top.
Yes, presentación. There.
Yes.
Is it okay now?
Yeah,
Yes,
it's fine
please.
now. Yes, yes.
Thank you for that, Vani. Okay, so as some of you mentioned a minute ago, the problem that motivated the study is the difficulty that some students face in English teaching programs in the province of Córdoba, which is a province in the country of Argentina, for understanding and producing texts in different genres. And in particular, EFL students learning history as a secondary subject in higher education face the challenge of reading and writing in a language that is not their mother tongue. So that involves like a double challenge, because they have to master the lexicogrammatical features of English in general, and also those features which are specific to the discipline. So within the field of social sciences, one of the genres that we work with is the historical accounts. And these type of texts have some complexity, because reading and producing historical accounts, in order to do that, students need to reconstruct complex lines of reasoning. And a key feature of this type of texts is causal and temporal relations. And they can be expressed through various linguistic resources, and they can also be left implicit. And sometimes that is also something difficult for students to grasp. Good. So the aim of this paper is to provide a detailed analysis of temporal and causal relations in 5 historical accounts taken from history books frequently used in English teaching programs in Argentina. And we aim to contribute to the understanding of disciplinary genres within the field of social sciences, as I said before, by analyzing the choices made in relation to temporal and causal connections. And this is expected to facilitate the design of teaching materials. So this study is theoretically anchored in the main tenets of systemic functional linguistics. And as we all know, systemic functional linguistics views language as a system of choices through which we language users can express different types of meanings in context. And as I mentioned before, the genre historical account is constructed along a chronological narrative model where the change of cause and effect is presented through the seemingly natural unfolding of a sequence of events over time. Our analysis followed the definition of causality by Halliday as a relation of enhancement in which one clause clause, expands another very bit, and it includes reason, purpose, and behalf. Causalities, as I mentioned before, can be realized in different ways, and it can be expressed experientially, logically, or textually. So for the realizations of causal relations within the transitivity system, we identify processes such as cause, highlighted in red there, participants, such as one of the most significant causes of tension, so cause is there used as a noun, and also realizations of causality as circumstances, for example, with heavy losses. We also analyzed realization of causality as logical meanings. In this case, we have so that, with a binder introducing a dependent clause, and also realizations of causality as textual meanings, in which we have there the conjunctive adjunct, therefore, linking two ideas that belong to two clauses that are two independent clauses that are not structurally related. As for temporal relations, they are defined by Halliday as relations of enhancement, which include extent and location. And within temporal relations, we included those, or we identify those which are thematized and therefore are given a prominence within the clause, and those which are placed in ring position towards the end of the clause, which tend to be the focus of information. So as I mentioned before, we analyze our corpus is made up of 5 historical accounts in English taken from books frequently used in English teaching programs in Argentina. And all these texts that we selected deal with the topic of the First World War, which is a key topic in the history syllabus. How did we carry out the analysis? Well, we identify both causal and temporal relations. In the case of causal relations, we classify them into explicit and implicit. And when they were implicit, we further classify them into experiential, logical, and textual meanings, following Hoffman, as I said a minute ago. And as for temporal relations, we identify them and then we classify them according to their position in the clause. So whether they came in theme position or as part of the read. So let's move on to the findings and discussion. These are the percentages of the temporal relations that we found in our texts. And as you can see, most of the temporal relations coincided with the theme of the clause. 63.2% of the temporal relations were also or coincided with the theme of the clause, with the point of departure. Whereas 36.8% of the temporal relations appeared in ring positions. In a minute, Vanina is going to show all the examples. And as for causal relations, as you can see, the reason and result were the most frequent, with 72% of that type, 24.6% of purpose, and only 3% of manner. As for the realization of causal relations, almost only 25% of them were implicit. If we take together the realizations of processes, participants, and circumstances as elements of the transitivity system, they made up a 57% of the realizations of the transitivity system. Then only 6.3% of the causal relations were binders or linkers, and 11% belong to were conjunctive adjuncts that between independent and structurally related clauses, as I mentioned a minute ago. So now Vanina is going to provide examples so as to illustrate all these findings.
Okay, so now I'll take over. Now we'd like to illustrate our findings with this text, which is an extract about First World War, as Natalia mentioned. This is the war on the Western Front reaches a stalemate. And in this first slide, we've highlighted the temporal circumstances, temporal relations. The thematized temporal circumstances have been highlighted in dark green. We can see, for example, as soon as war was declared in the first paragraph, and at first in the second paragraph. In the first instance, we can see a temporal conjunction together with a dependent clause. And we can also see in the second case, conjunctive adjunct. In the case of the temporal circumstances and temporal relations in green position, we have highlighted them in light green. And we can see that some of them are more definite, for example, on the 4th of August, while others are more indefinite, less precise. Now, we have chosen this extract because it shows the variety of resources that are used to express temporal and causal relations, and because this text also shows the different ways in which both meanings interact. So in the next slide, we can see, could you please show the next? Okay, thank you. Here we can see in this slide, we can see the causal relations, sorry. And the participants have been highlighted in purple. We have, for example, the idea, the theory, and then some nominalizations like resistance or bombardments. In these cases, for example, in the case of bombardments, the process destroyed relates to complete figures, which have been expressed in these nominalizations. Now, we can see some processes in red, like had to, try to, or expected. In these cases, we have, for example, a mental process which shows a purpose. And we also have some material processes later on, like one and bought. There are some circumstances to fight against or to mobilize, and some logical meanings as well. But now, if we look at both the temporal and causal relations, we can see that the first paragraph, which starts with this as soon as war was declared, in the first paragraph, we have mainly purpose. So purpose here is expressed by modal verbs and infinitive clauses and mental verbs. And then in the second paragraph, the one which starts with at first, deals mainly with cause and effect, material processes. And we also have some more simple past tense, which shows a sequence of events. So we have organized this information in a diagram, which we will show you in the next slide. So we have found that in this case, students have to construe complex timelines, because they have to construe two timelines. One which deals with purposes, with theories, with ideas, with hypothetical meanings, with possibilities, what the Germans expected to happen, and on the other hand, what actually happened, in which we have the world of actual events. So this is one of the difficulties that we have found in terms of the relation between temporal meanings and causal meanings. Now, we'll also show you another text, another extract. Because we can see another type of relation in this text of the First Battle of Ypres in Belgium. And again, the thematized temporal circumstances have been highlighted in dark green. And we have two cases here by November 1914 and as 1914 ended. And then the temporal circumstances in green position have been highlighted in light green. Okay, there is a person here from Belgium. Okay, so now what we found in this case is, well, we have different realizations of temporal relations, and we have different ways to frame time. So we have, in some cases, for example, an extent of time or a duration of time. In the case, for example, from the 12th of October to November the 11th of 1914. We also have some points in time, like in December, and there are other cases in which we have phases of periods of time. So in most cases, there is a linear progression of time, but we also find some cases in which, for example, nouns like a deadlock make reference to cyclical periods or phases in recurrent patterns of history. Okay. Now, let's see in the next slide how these temporal relations interact with causal relations. In this case, we have the causal relations in the first paragraph are mainly implicit relations. And we can see that in the first line, we have some general statement in which there is circumstance of time. And this general statement is explained by the next implicit causal relations. So the statements that follow explain or support or provide the reasons for that first statement. And then we have a process meant, and then in the next paragraph, again, we start with a temporal meaning, and then we have some explanation or reasons to support the general statement. The general statement, it was a deadlock. And the same happens in the next case. We have some framing of events in time, and then with a general statement about the situation, and then that situation is explained with an implicit realization of causal relations.
So, Vani, as they haven't read the text, maybe we can read one example of what you were saying so that they can follow you, because they are not familiar with the content of the text, even though they of course may be familiar with the topic, because it's part of our shared knowledge.
Okay, so for example, in the first paragraph, we have the key battle in this race to the sea was the first Battle of Ypres from October the 12th to November the 11th, 1914. And then we have the British Expeditionary Forces lost around 50,000 men, and the Germans probably 100,000. But the British, sorry, I can't see because
but the British held this important ground. They kept control of the English Channel ports. which meant they could be supplied with equipment and reinforcements. So we have the general,
this is,
yes. Yes.
sorry, we can see why we can say that the Battle of Ypres was key in the race to the sea. The statements that we have just read explain the reason why it can be called a key battle. Okay. The same happens in the other cases. We have some general statement and then the reasons why that can be called, why that statement can be made. Okay.
Yes, and that general statement, as Vanina was saying, coincides with the temporal relation. Yeah. Next one.
Okay, now we have summarized some of our findings, and we can say that the understanding of historical accounts requires students to reconstruct complex lines of reasoning, since these texts display high degree of abstraction, generic participants, and the interplay between causal and temporal relations. And these complex lines of reasoning also interact, and they have to be included in complex timelines as well. And these timelines have to be construed by decoding the variety of resources which frame time. We have found different interactions between temporal and causal relations. The most evident is the temporal implications of relations of cause and consequence, in which the former precedes the latter. In these cases, we typically find cases in which the sequence of events is seen as inevitable or irreversible, and there is a linear flow time. But there are other cases in which the sequence of events in time is stopped by the construal of relations of purpose and manner. Either because, for example, the purposes and intentions of participants are explained as an alternative timeline or hypothetical timeline, showing what was expected to happen or what could have happened. And sometimes because the manner in which something happened is explained. Students have to be made aware of these different resources so as to be able to, well, on the one hand, understand, and on the other, produce texts with historically valued ways of expressing time and cause. Well, when causal links disrupt the chronological developments, students may struggle to situate these causal connections because they involve moving back in time and moving forward in time as well. But also because sometimes they lack the general knowledge of, they lack the knowledge of resources and the ways in which history typically encodes these meanings. Okay, that's here we have our references. We can send them if you need them. Thanks. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Natalie and Vania, for the presentation. So now it's time for us to discuss. Yes, we have one hand raising here. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I have a very basic question for which I apologize if I missed it. What age or stage, where in a curriculum? I understand it's for English language learners, but would this be elementary, high school, tertiary? Where would that located?
Tertiary level students who are studying to become either English teachers or translators.
Interesting, but not necessarily history specialists, correct?
No, exactly. It's part of the curriculum.
The reason I'm asking is not just for trivia and curiosity, but I'm wondering if this has something to do with one's expectations of history, because so often in primary and secondary school, history is treated as a series of logical, linear events without much discussion of the why and the nuance and the different perspectives. And so the interruptions of commentary, of causality, I'm wondering if that also sort of interrupts the logic of how history has been presented as this linear trend, just description of what's happened rather than discussion of causality.
Yes, so we study these texts within these English teaching programs in our province, Córdoba, Argentina. And students are in second year. They are around 19 years old. They have an intermediate or upper intermediate level of English. But this is, well, we have called this a secondary subject. I don't know if that is, you understand what we mean, but they are starting to be English teachers or translators. And they have within their course of studies this subject that is called sociocultural studies, where we deal with this type of texts, with historical accounts. I don't know if I'm answering the question or not.
Yes, and you specifically answered, excuse me, and I'm also sort of speculating as to what some of the difficulty is, not only linguistically, but socioculturally in terms of the expectations of what history does and how it does it.
That's why they face this double challenge that I was talking about, because sometimes they have trouble with language to really understand what the text means, from a reading comprehension problem, let's say. And apart from that, many of them have the problem of understanding these causal connections that take place within the text. And apart from that, sometimes they don't have the background knowledge that they need to understand a particular type of text. So that's why they have a lot of difficulty in understanding historical accounts. And because of that, we are trying to explore and analyze these causal and temporal connections so as to facilitate the understanding and later on the production of these type of texts. Vani, I don't know if you want to add something.
Yes, I'd like to say that sometimes we have also studied primary school texts in Spanish. And when we did that research, we found that most textbooks students use at that level at primary school include first biographies, descriptions, and students progress in their studies. They go through different grades. They find more cases of historical recounts and then later historical accounts. So there is a progression in the level of difficulty, and more resources and different strategies are taught. But when students come to university or tertiary level, they are expected to read historical accounts from the beginning, and they are expected to deal with all of the strategies that these texts involve at once. Okay, because well, as they have already studied history, but in their mother tongue, which is completely different. And so there is a big gap there. There is no the progression that they went through in their mother tongue.
I also wonder if there's a gap in representations of history coming from different countries and backgrounds, and what might be seen as common or shared background knowledge might still be done from different perspectives. I mean, even working within English, if you ask a Canadian when World War II started versus an American when World War II started, we're 2 years apart, and that's a cultural reference rather than purely linguistic. But back to the linguistics, I'm also wondering, if looking in explanation, if you looked at different types of explanation, such as factorial, not that A caused B, but A and B were components in, and sort of that messiness, or if that was part of your analysis or not.
We studied factorial explanations in Spanish, but we haven't dealt with them in English yet, because actually our main project was to study primary school texts. And there we found cases of factorial explanations and different explanations, though they were not the most frequent, right? They were like extra texts that students got, but and later on in their grades.
Fair enough, because they're messier, they're much more complicated and nuanced.
Yes. Mhm.
This is fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So do we have any other questions for the presenters? Everyone? And may I ask that if we have any other presenters waiting here in our session, because we have 2 papers that may be cancelled. Yes, I just confirm. So if we have no other questions for our presenters, thank you very much, you both, Natalia and your colleagues. And so we will stop here, and yes, we will wait for another library session. And thank you everyone, and hope to see you again in our next session.
Thank you. Thank you for being there.
Yes.
Thank you.
Natalia and Vanina, if you have a moment, may I ask a little bit more?
Yes, of course.
If you go back to the slide, contributions and from excerpt 2, pardon me.
Yes, let me find the excerpt number 2. This one?
Extract to the First Battle of Ypres in Belgium. Next one. That one, bingo. Thank you. This I mean to present this as a question, not a criticism of your coding. It's something that I've struggled with in the third sentence of the second paragraph that begins despite this.
As 1914 ended, that one?
Yep. Before that, a couple sentences before that begins with despite this, that fronted circumstance. So I think that would be coded as a contingency. I'm wondering if you think that has a role in causal logic of the counter expectancy. Everybody expected the French to quit, but they didn't. And despite this, and then the logic. But that's more of contingency rather than cause.
Because actually yes, we haven't included cases of condition or a concession. So, but there is, just because it was too broad to take all those cases into account for this study, but actually you're totally right. It shows some causal connection.
And I've never understood why contingency or condition has not been a subcategory of cause. That's something that I've struggled with. This is not a criticism of you whatsoever. It's like, oh my, and sometimes I think of it as an almost cause. Could have been a cause, but wasn't.
Exactly.
Yes.
And as we said, there is also some kind of hypothetical meaning there, right? Because of the relation to expectations.
And because you mentioned that, I'm asking the question. Yeah. Yeah, it's so messy.
And
Yes.
this can cause a lot of difficulties because students may struggle a lot more to think about that expectancy. And then the results.
Yeah, yeah. And yet when it's a fronted circumstance, that's sort of the marked form that is drawing attention to that counter expectancy and the hypothetical nature of it. Yeah. Oh, very interesting work. Working with authentic text is so messy.
Yes. Yes.
Absolutely.
And besides, we haven't worked a lot here with the nominalizations and how information is compressed, because that adds another difficulty for students to decompress all the meanings that are encoded in the nominalizations. So yes, it's hard work, but I think that it's good starting with, as Marina was saying, with making students aware of all the different realizations of causal relations, explicit and implicit, and also the interplay with temporal relations.
And when you're talking about implicit and explicit, I've just been doing some work not only on nominalizations, but also on logical grammatical metaphor, where the explicit causal marker of because gets buried into a process, like this led to this, or this suggested that. And that, of course, can be on a cline, which is why the logical grammatical metaphor is so useful. Because then you can not just say because, but you can grade it up or down. And it
like the meant there.
Pardon me?
Sorry. Like the process that is highlighted in red there led to meant, yes. Or the reason why, when you have the nominalization, the reason why, and then you have a very long pose modifier.
Yeah.
So yes.
Yeah. And I hadn't realized, it makes perfect sense that logical grammatical metaphor co-occurs with ideational or nominalizations. Of course, but I hadn't put those two together until reading into it. Yeah. Very interesting work.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you both, and thank you, Jennifer, very much for your constructive feedback with the presenters. So we stop now, enjoy your lunch, and see you next session. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you. See you.